Great. So
Yeah.
it's a cool day here in Crestone, Colorado. It's Saturday, July 16th. And I have the honor to have a little bit of time here of someone I just reconnected with recently. This is part of our ongoing Solutionaries series where I get the opportunity to get educated and talk with amazing people doing amazing solution-based work in the world. And today, hailing from Topanga Canyon in the Los Angeles area, but also now in Arizona, a solutionary and doing an amazing project. And I've had a little bit of opportunity to talk with him and see some photos. But John, I want to welcome JohnMichaelCohen. So welcome to Solutionaries, brother.
Thank you. And this is a reoccurrence from quite a while ago, where community outreach was an important part of my efforts in developing the first series of fruit tree forests in the middle of the moderate lower elevation Southwest desert. And as this project begins again, then somehow not having really the time and the stress levels with everything going on in work, and yet making the time for these events to start happening again, which is right in keeping with having a serious land base again that must proceed with very measured, a very measured plan versus the first time. Yeah,
absolutely. And that was one of the things, I met you through Lisa Wolf. We were on a call together, and I was eagerly listening to some of the work you're doing, in this time of the old paradigm collapse, and a time that we need more solutions, and a time where people are bringing new and innovative designs and actually bringing back some traditional ecological knowledge and ancient designs. And a lot of people are running off to the jungles of Costa Rica and all of these tropical places and kind of heading for the hills. I was amazed because you're in Arizona in a fairly arid area doing an amazing project. And I would say, walking your talk, kind of grabbing the bull by the horns and really showing people what's possible with effort and awareness. So to start with, can you tell us a little bit about really, the work you do, and how did you even get involved in this?
Well, I'm going to just say, being true to my Aquarius nature here, I've always been a people person. Of course, that's caused tremendous problems, being stupidly over trusting, and I still trust on the same level. I just learned very slowly through the years to look for red flags where if I have a pearl to throw, that at least it won't go to swine.
Amen.
Because there's not a lot of time in reference to things I was made aware of at a very young age, and watching those occurrences. I kept a little couple paragraphs set aside here from another source for about this time period, which also coincides with the Hopis, which have their blood and spirit and pretty close to that land too. So I had 3 of my children born 20 miles from where I re-landed, and my oldest daughter born in a teepee here in Topanga. I'm the farthest thing from a hippie, but I always loved the hippie crowd when it came to music and events and dancing. But I relate more to cops and hunters and military people who knew how to really be there for each other, both in in good times and in crises. And that's a imbalance when it comes to critical situations later. If we end up into a breakdown of society to the point of huge unsafe communities in the big cities, it's going to require something we've gone through as human beings through history, but something we've become unfamiliar with because we've had such blessings from this incredible country that we've forgotten that people can be reduced to a modern country like Venezuela, and then with things not managed right, and with power and overreach that that neighbors end up eating their neighbors' dogs.
Yeah, I wouldn't say right now that we're in the age of teamwork and collaboration. And although that's really the what's being needed right now, it's for people to learn how to collaborate, cooperate, and again work together. And kind of what I say is like bringing our superpowers together in that circle of full spectrum regenerative design, which has to do with food and water security. It has to do with working with the land, regenerative agriculture, permaculture. It has to do with our awareness about water. It has to, models of alternative economies. It has to do with also
right.
the roles of arts and culture and spirituality around quality of life, and also peace and justice. Because as you were saying, and I think we both have had opportunities to spend in indigenous communities, that sometimes a lot of people are marginalized out of society based on economic or racial profiling and stuff. So again, I know you're a busy guy. I appreciate having this time to talk with you, and I'm really looking forward to the fascinating discourse. And I think even since we began the call, I can still hear some crumbling of the old paradigm accelerating. So it's very timely.
Yeah. The I though I can paraphrase this, I'll read it out. This was the elders. I was privy to some quite extraordinary things. 19 years old, it was the Academy of Atlantis in the early days of a real metaphysical school based around not Christ consciousness, but based around Jesus the Christ. Very different. And so it was touching into some very, very real occurrences. There was some tremendous harassment from some satanic organizations, because this was something that was actually kind of clarifying and demystifying a lot of the new age crap that was being handed out very quickly in the really rapidly accelerating in the 70s.
Right.
And those, because there's realities deeply wound into our connection with supernatural occurrences, which we also have to have in a relationship in that, in a sense, when we're developing land properly. I met two of the founding two of the founding people from I just forgot its name, in Scotland, famous
Finhorn.
Yes, I found myself meeting so many amazing people. I mean, in my work, and that's in very advanced and sophisticated landscape architecture, and in environments and pools and water features, and I've been privy to difficult arenas, but where you have powerful connections, to go to work with Matthew McConaughey or Renee Zellweger or Sugar Ray Leonard or Elon Musk. I mean, it's very difficult, but it's nice over time to have the credibility of a portfolio. Go, hey, I did the second round of the Beverly Hills hotel pools, and then Obama's swimming in them. Not a president I cared for particularly, but I'm just saying that it's interesting that I have to humbly, as just a regular wrecked person, having made many mistakes and asking for forgiveness every day of my life, to having veered far from who the true nature of my soul is, but not being afraid to own and use the things that I know I'm good at, so that we can proceed and get stuff done. I can beat myself up, in my quiet moments, and go, how could you ever go there? And any of us who are going to really make this work must do that. There has to be an element of internal personal humility daily, or we're going to get nowhere. And then at the same time, a healthy form of pride to go, hey man, after all this time, I had all these experiences, including some very, very serious, I want to say IFOs, identified flying objects, because that was pretty extraordinary, including with my parents when I was small in Joshua Tree, and doing a rock station interview with George Van Tassel at Joshua Tree at the time when that was getting getting a lot of attention. the military sightings and things, and this all still plays into a part into community development. But the
Absolutely.
and now
Absolutely.
it comes time with I'm doing my roommate's mother's boyfriend is Robert Clotworthy, who does Ancient Aliens Declassified, and he heard we're doing landscape work for them, and he heard some list of my stories and said, would you be open to an interview? So here I go, okay, in that full circle comment that we started with, it's that even things like that, yes, does that always give a little more credibility because you're being interviewed on a TV show again, or you did something in landscape? Sure, that helps because you want to be listened to, because it again has to do with that the humble state that says, hey man, you've had enough experiences, you've done enough stuff, you've made enough mistakes and failures, but you can't succeed without tremendous failures, but you keep doing it, you improve again individually on the attempts of the things you got to do, that you're doing for more than yourself. And then if you can do that collectively, starting with just a few people and then growing a little bigger than that. And I'm going to say a perfect example of that was when Seeds of Change was not yet large. They became a very big business from New Mexico. They came and hung out at our community. They so appreciated the guidelines I've written, which were from all the way from somebody in front of the property there, north of the Gila, very close to where we are again now, in Dripping Springs Mountains, where I had a son born in a cave in November, where my ex-wife hiked in labor so steep up that mountain to that cave that 2 of my gallons of the 4 gallons of water I brought up broke, and she did that. And so it was there was some real investment emotionally and spiritually and physically and financially into that area. And they, the representatives from Seeds of Change, were so impressed with the guidelines that we would give out to new people who were visiting. They asked if they could use them. And one other group in the South, I forgot the name, and I'm going, see, that's good. That means that from suffering and mistakes, and then the good stuff, and putting it all together and sieving out the things that stop things from working, that they're already wanting to utilize this for their own community development. And that's like, there's no monetary gain out of something like that. There's a gain in enough wisdom being developed through weathering many storms and developing things and losing things and developing again and losing things at work. And that's
exactly. And exactly, as you know, even with this, my commitment of doing this show, Solutionaries, we're germinating new ways and new perspectives to look at things. And even though some of them might be actually ancient ways, a lot of people think that when the colonists arrived here, that America was naturally this amazing paradise. Well, in some ways it was, but a lot of people aren't aware of traditional ecological knowledge and the amount of stewarding that the indigenous communities did to the land around things like prescribed burns and fires and water management, and how they worked with the natural world. And like you were saying, and I just found out some fascinating information about Rudolf Steiner and his work in Waldorf education. A lot of that is based on understanding the spiritual and supernatural maybe dimensions of what we identify as this 3D physical world and these elements, but that there is maybe a bigger picture than some of us are seeing. And the idea to cross-pollinate, to germinate and cultivate some of these ideas, and especially getting it out, to more people who might not have been exposed to some of these ways of thinking is essential at this time where, again, so much of the old paradigm seems to be collapsing and changing, from the economy to the environment. I know right now, because I'm in Colorado, I did a tour around the Southwest. I saw some of the horrific lessening of the water flow in the Rio Grande. I was recently at the Grand Canyon. The Colorado River is extremely low, probably the lowest it's ever been in recorded history. And then I was in Las Vegas, and Lake Powell, and literally the water is feet away from not even being able to feed the hydroelectric turbines that power Las Vegas. So again, we're not, like you were saying at the beginning of the conversation, we're not just like talking about these countercultural were bohemian concepts from the 60s and 70s, but we're actually, these are ideas and concepts that are becoming mainstream, that are going to be essential that we embrace as we go through this, like the Hopi say, the Koyaanisqatsi, this time where our value system is upside down and everything is out of balance. And it takes people, like yourself and others, to bring these solutions. And I know we can go down so many rabbit holes, but it's really fascinating. So if anyone happens to hear or see this discourse, what exactly are you doing in Arizona? Because when I saw the pictures, they are teaching well, and the bees, the pollinators, what you're doing with the landscaping, the land stewarding. I mean, and you have an incredible legacy of accolades and history in your resume of projects you've done and people you've worked with. But what is John Michael Stain Cohen doing right now in Arizona on this piece of property? Why are you there, and what is the intention of what you're doing?
Michael, let me answer that through a partial response to what you were saying, because it all has to do with that. Emerson and Lewis and Clark. There's so many just beautiful early visionaries of the lands of our country. And then we go back to things that work and things that didn't. See, people didn't know that when Buddhism first began, it was filled with violence and killing. There was a time period when the Hopi and Navajo Hopi actually killed men, women, and children just to get fruits and nuts. That's for all the vegans, which I am too. But they killed men, women, and children to get to their stores when they had a starvation period. And you think of the Hopis just as this incredible sacred tribe. Well, contained within it, without losing the thread, just like going back to when the Pilgrims landed, there were tribes there then that we would never want to have anything to do with, that were brutal and just killed each other. And then we would find souls coming back and incarnating into the early times of this country, and then bringing more developed inner spirituality into their Indian bodies in that round, and beginning the process of sharing the more developed things from those tribes, but adding into it, like the Nez Perce did, a whole Indian alphabet and things like that. I always remind people, in a time like that, you could have an infected tooth and die from it. I want the technology we have right now, which an infected tooth is nothing. We want to take that, but now we have to take another gigantic step. And that gigantic step, the paradox is that it goes back to what I was just saying, that it's just one person, immediate family, couple good friends, some campouts, and then a few people living one place. And then you reach out to some of the neighbors and maybe visit the local church, get to know the people at the little fast food stores on the highway nearby. And you just start the outreach. And again, the filtering process going on. And for people who are interested, which just happened, I pulled into get ice, because we only have ice just there, that we have some very good solar generators and things ready to go into play soon. As we're working there now, we just got to pick up ice at the local Circle K or Speedway gas station right there where the Gila crosses Winkleman. And and I walked in the other day, and she said, aren't you the one who got all the acres out there? What kind of a botanical gardens is? See, I know her from from nowhere, but already the little town, just from a few of the neighbors, and handing out, contrary to what my retired sheriff buddy says, is to expose what you're doing. I choose a more difficult path, and I do expose what I'm doing, because it has to be integrated, shared, and at least partially respected by people who may not relate to it at all, or have never seen things like this. And that develops extremely important inroads. If it comes down to a societal collapse, you want to be in relationship with all the good neighbors you can have, because that's what it's going to take. And that's on the extreme level of where I believe we will eventually end up. But it's also where you don't want your development to be isolationist. There are plenty of egalitarian communities that really mean nothing. In my prior experience with the land that I had, the 40 acres, similar to your land project, there in that valley, a spectacular area, below the cave where my son was born, and created a fruit tree forest there. It's there. Half the community's still there. There are a lot of, nice, creative, indigenous rock used cemented saunas and structures. And then they have the stupid, ugly vinyl pool that I would never have put up, and it has chlorine in it. I'm going, what are you guys doing? Come on, Don. I knew Don from way back then. He's still there. He knew my kids when we were there, and going, at least use hydrogen peroxide in the water. You can get it from any supply. So I'm saying, this is the, in a very, very big picture, how you can find the time to pull the things through the next series of societal sieves that are going to work and remain sustainable during unprecedented inflation and unprecedented amounts of money, and money being given to countries that want to destroy us, and we hand them money, and we take away the power of the thin blue line, and attitudes get developed towards the protection of our streets. And so you have more police shot than any other time in our history. And so we have to look at these things. And it's not somebody saying, the cliche term, don't focus on negatives. It's negative to not be aware, at least some focus, but be very aware of the negatives, or they're going to consume you or partially wreck what you're doing. And so, it's the old term in here, you build this gorgeous, biodiverse development, but you're still looking at both what can happen if you plant plants, and this will I'll begin to answer your question here on what I got to do and what I am doing. You can plant plants that are non-indigenous. Most of what I planted was, and it was very successful. It made the bees that were there already much stronger. Okay, it helped the birds, it helped pollination. Generally, planting things to make sure that you have a lot of pollinizers in the work that you put in your area, being very aware of the wind destroying, the pollen if it's windy at times of year for things you're planting that are going to flower then. So you have to keep micro dissecting, like the biosphere, which was done inside a dome with a lot of money. It's now the biospheres without the dome, and you create the dome through the way you deal with structures and windbreaks and plant breaks and in an arid region, humidifying it. So it's much more risky to bring in non-indigenous animals like cows, which is like an elephant herd. A bovine herd is like an elephant herd in the desert, and it's fragile, and it's really, really tough on that land. And yet, unbeknownst maybe to you either, that the Sonora Desert, not where Burning Man's held, and not the dry, Nevada dry lake beds, or the very, very harsh Mojave Desert with gravelly soil, but the Sonora from northern Mexico to the Grand Canyon, from my studies, was the first exposed land on planet Earth during the cooling tropical Earth. And that's why people have such a tremendous emotional and visual experience when they are walking around areas of Sedona or the Grand Canyon, because it's revealing the age of the Earth. So I have a piece of property in this desert region, and there's more food per square foot than any other natural area on the planet. Very few people know that. If you're in intense jungle where you've got rain and everything, if you're watching shows like Naked and Afraid, you see how hard the survival is there. Besides that, bugs kill more people than anything else, and and you're ravaged. So dry areas are good. Colorado includes dry areas. It's pretty cool that it's often a low humidity, forest area. High elevation, low humidity, and that makes it easy. I've been to places in Colorado where, and in other areas, Montana, where the mosquitoes are dive bombing. They're bending their bodies like a U, and even as you're putting up your window, running for your life in your car, they're flying through the crack of the window to get you. Those are in unacceptable and intolerable environments, and you don't want to send up you know a an effort of sustainable community in environments like that. So it has to be so well sought out. The purpose of this land area is multifaceted. Let's say number one, which would be hearing the sped up process. I'm going to go back to the term biodiversity. By when people ask a question, what are you going to plant there, or what are you doing in that land? And I'm saying I'm planting every non-indigenous plant possible. So yeah, I like to say that in a serious context, but also to shock people, because it goes back to saying you could have a toothache in the primitive days, a tooth infection in the primitive days, and then you die from a tooth infection. We don't need that. We need to take all of the good technology that's been so much of it created out of this country, and start applying it to teaching people a new way to relate to the earth, and people being interested in that. Whether they go back home to the city, you want to send them with some thoughts that they're going to share about land. What does that do as far as the difference between honoring the creator and respecting the creation? So I don't worship the creation. I honor God, and I respect the creation. And the creation is of God. And biblically, we're asked to be good stewards of the land. What's a good steward of the land? I'd much rather see, I have to bring in politics for a moment here because there's no way around that. In the same way that you have opposing forces in abortion, and you have people for right to life who will not concede to any meeting point to make something better for both sides there. And then you have people who say only my body, and not considering that that's another body in you at any particular point. And I look at it and say, okay, you can say at least once a heartbeat for any rational person, that's now a human being. So there is some kind of meeting point with very, very polarized extremes in both those areas. And then we have the meeting point of technology and natural living. The prior land, like many communities, can just end up as a series of wilderness apartments, having no meaning to anybody other than just being self-serving for people who want to be parked in the wilderness, pay some money, and be around maybe a semi-cool place. That's the same thing as somebody going in a cave in this day and age. Maybe you'll achieve something for yourself, but that's not the time period we're in. You got to go through the burnout daily and be involved. And if you're not being involved, then you've given up on the most important part of creation, which is our fellow human beings, before animals, before the earth, before anything else.
Well, there's an old saying, if you're not part of the solution, you might be part of the problem.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Well, that falls into the same thing again. And one part of that, which is for good men to do, for evil to triumph, is for good men to do nothing. It's the same type of, absolutely that same mindset. So truth absolutely has no meaning without action. And so I'm coming from a place where I know that I have to work hard. And again, burnout mode, this is sweat, tears, exhaustion. I worked that other land like 10 people. And on that land prior, I put in miles of irrigation uh, and dealt with the problems that come with drip irrigation, which will be animals chewing sometimes on the thinner 1/4 inch laser line. And this is all HDPE. This is all high density polyethylene, which is certified and allowable for potable water to homes. So when I'm running irrigation, I'm not just running pipe that wouldn't be usable for drinking as well. Now somebody will say, here we come to the meeting point between opposing forces. You'll have people say, plastic under no circumstance. I'm going, okay, we'll go ahead and try and grow some bamboo and see if you can find a way to connect that bamboo, which will last for a little while with water, and then it will fall apart and channel water through the bamboo, and do it on any serious level where you can take care of a bunch of people. Or somebody saying castor bean oil and going, yes, then you're subject to weather. And if you think of the great technologies and population centers of the world, depending on its fuel source from a plant, then when you have a bad weather event, you don't have the plant to produce anything, and it falls right back into this. Will return to oasis or alien outpost building community that has real meaning to people. It's the same thing with being forced into electric energy. I'm going to say you don't kill the great whales and you don't chop down the giant redwood trees. But where we are at in society right now, drill for oil, hell yes. You just have to improve the way you do it and do a reasonable transition that doesn't destroy people's lives and economies and businesses, because the solar panel is 80-something% oil in its production, and the hydroelectric plant needs that lubrication. It's all oil based. I mean, so we want to get away from the plasticides floating around in the ocean and putting 90 pounds of undigestible plastic in the belly of that whale. Absolutely. Big part of that's the fishing nets and the things that are left. And it all falls back to a consciousness and how we can be good stewards in dealing with what we're doing. Now, those are very big outreaches. And you had people like, Paul Watson break away from, for Sea Shepherd, break away from Greenpeace when they got corrupt and had lavish parties, and they started with such good intent. And that's a real template for what happens with communities, new age communities, over and over and over. I don't want to be part of a new age community. I don't want to develop things that are trendy or cool. I want to, on the architectural side, a true experience for people to see that, look, here's a very interesting way to work with the land. The Descanso Gardens here in Pasadena, in the northeast section of LA, in the winter, have their very large botanical garden area done with spectacular LED lighting shows that fluctuate and change, and they add Chihuli's glass sculptures in there. All of that belongs, where it's not just some garden areas or some greenhouses. It's not just a couple wilderness apartments with people living there in a community environment, but it's really no different than apartments in the city. This has to be, like you just said, this has to be the new paradigm. You take the things that work, coming from being grateful, being respectful of our fantastic, our fantastic American culture that we've had, that we keep looking at the mistakes and the problems of the country's history, but we come from it from a grateful place that we've done so much more than all the nations together put together for the rest of the world. And so that returns again to the individual, the individual state of mind, which is, we also look at the mistakes, our transgressions, those things individually, but we take our strengths and we apply them. And in the sense of a community land base, how do you know when you have right people? I have a communal household here where the nursery is in Topanga. We've had some nightmares. We've had to get restraining orders, and somebody who seemed so cool and turned out to be an absolute monster right here internally inside your own home when everything's already so difficult. So we're not gonna, in that sense, there's gonna always be the unknown. We know that the only constant is that we don't know the future. We know what's been prophesized and we see those things happening, and it's not by timetables. Generally, it's by series of events. And
Right.
everything I've learned in this life so far leads me right back to where I was, where I learned how to carve out something carefully on the native grounds there, and make it into a momentary paradise for visitors, for people living there, having aspects of very beautiful things, but very hard work, and all the issues that come along with human beings anywhere you go. It doesn't change because you've gone into the wilderness. You're an egalitarian community. You know, the eagles can end up eating each other's babies. So
Right. And as you're saying, a lot of that is based on the whole spirit of innovation, taking what works, moving that forward, and trying to figure out solutions for those things that don't work. And it's interesting because with our organization, Earthstock Foundation, and the work we're doing, I talk to a lot of investment people who are interested in the green economy or investing into, how can I make sure that there's even a climate or a world that my children can live in. And a lot of those, the majority of those people are really eager to invest in technologies, investing in land, investing in people. It's very interesting to me. It's like a whole different
that's right.
creature altogether. So, again, I call it people's. Everyone comes into the world with a certain perception based on your family, how you're raised, your genetic astrology, your culture, where you're raised in the world, and then through the course of our life, we generate a perception from our preceptions. We create our own unique perceptions. And with that, that's what creates people's projections of how they apply themselves into the world and they interpret the world and such. So it's a very unique, very divisive time, but also it has the highest potential for people to unify and collaborate because it's to the point where I think even potentially a human survival, everyone's like, oh, save the earth. It's like, well, the Earth's been here a billion years. It will regenerate. And we saw that
There,
during the pandemic when people
there you
stopped driving and stopped doing their destructive behavior towards the planet. The planet can regenerate. There's a natural organic intelligence there. But what we have to do is we have to wake up about what part we play in that. So I think, again, in what you're saying and what I believe, it's like everyone has their unique uh, superpower and perception of reality in the way that they bring their understanding to that table. And we really have to start figuring out how to work together more effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment with that now on what I call my form of permaculture. That's a limited phrase for how I approach this. Uh, and I liked how you slipped in there genetic astrology, because as in dogs, they showed that dog species has almost no playing. These are recent tests in the way that dogs' personality is. I find that very apropos for that genetics would be much more a program that we would internally follow than finding that when you have an alcoholic parent, you're genetically predisposed to alcohol, which is now proven almost to be completely incorrect. It's very interesting. So I sent you a picture. You saw the polywogs, I think, in the tire tracks.
Yep.
So I said, look at this. My daughter spotted this particular land. I know this land inside and out. It has a riparian area, meaning it has a permanent ancient green zone. So there's a small oasis of forest, a little mini Gila River. It's a conflagration of water systems. We're back to mentioning the San Pedro underground through that whole area, but you can see the whole mesquite forest along Highway 77 going north and south and going. I always looked and said, God, the soil's so rich. It's just a desert loam. Mesquites are a nitrogen fixer. So you really want to protect them, prune them so they give good shade, and plant things around them because they fix nitrogen in the same way a legume does, which is spectacular. The pod from a mesquite which I learned at Peter Bushnak's School of Survival Education, Revis Mountain, on the north side of the Superstitions at a higher elevation. And he made the tea from the mesquite that the Indians would use. And there's some properties similar to what aspirin has, which they would use for headaches, but it's slightly sweet like a carob, that pod. Not the beans are toxic, just like in Serotonia siliqua in the carob. Now, carobs happen to do very well there, and I don't know why more people, they become 90-foot trees, and they're very, very strong in the wind. They're hardwood. Why aren't more planted with people who live in the outlying areas there? There's none planted. Nobody has them. So same thing I experienced in landscape here. Why I'm 90 miles north in Santa Barbara, one of my favorite nurseries, San Marcos Nursery. Why do they have the royal clock vine, which flowers for at least 9 months out of the year, spectacular sky blue electric flower, heart-shaped leaf, and in landscape and creating, very colorful privacy zones, planting that onto trellises and things. Why wouldn't people have that planted here when you get color on a spectacular level that long? So integrating, I should say that there was a term used as alchemy, which was a mixture of alchemy and architecture. And we had, I believe his name was, it was Nader, like Nader Khalili, Khalil Gibran. It was Nader Khalili. He was an architect from Iran. When Iran had one of the largest modern day earthquakes, I believe it was 9.5 on the Richter scale. And the only things that stood were the kilns. And that's where kiln fired homes came from. He started that, another Aquarius. So he came and visited the land I was on when investors came in, when I was losing part of it, just couldn't keep it up between the city and there. And so I met him, just like I met the Hawkins from Finhorn, and talked with them. And I just saying, so somehow between the famous people and then the well-known people in a very alternative universe when it comes to the permacultural approach to community development. And I've had I just have crossed paths with some amazing people. I have to look at that and go, okay, John, regardless of your failures and mistakes, your soul has drawn these people to cross paths with, because that's right in front of your face, man. You have a responsibility. You're crossing paths because you contain knowledge. It's not book knowledge. It's knowledge that sounds like you're talking out your ass, except it turns out to be true most of the time, because you know this stuff and you just have to have a certain level of confidence. Confidence on its own is like truth without action. Confidence must be spiritual confidence, or it's not usable. And that means you, again, have a daily work in between all of our, all of our things that we do in life, that we are constantly forming that dialogue with the creator so we can have that spiritual confidence. So I looked at the tire tracks near our well. Our well, when they were drilling, they hit the clay strata between rock and sand, which is what you do when you're drilling. 1,500 or 500 yards north of that is the spring head and an old 25-foot long underground concrete reservoir, which was the way of doing water storage, which is very smart, actually. And that spring is filled with water. And apparently when they've pumped it hard before for years, it doesn't even drop an inch. That's the headwater of Piper Springs. Unfortunately, just missed it on my property line by 30 feet. And I knew that was going to probably happen. The neighbor, who I reached out for a year before I got a hold of him, and went through a couple bumps. He put up red flags, but he admitted he was bipolar. He's a genius. He knows Lisa Wolf's husband, who was a genius. And so finding him that he already knows circles of people, and I, out of nowhere, out of the spot I am, and I had to make a very careful legal letter for him to cross through the property to get onto his 20 acres that were left, because he didn't have land access. And he said in the same word, I want to work with you, John, but if you're not letting me get through, I'm going to have a lawsuit. And I brought it up with him. I said, you can't put in the same sentence, you want to work with somebody, or there'll be a lawsuit. He said, I'm bipolar. So he was humble to it. But I made a legal letter, and the litmus test was he signed it immediately, that I'm granting him access under temporary conditions, saying you can't bring anybody with mental illness, with drug or alcohol addiction. I mean, so these are the things we have to go back to normal living and put this into structured legal forms. If you don't have enough rules, no matter what you undertake, particularly community development, if you don't have enough rules, everything will, if it's too loosely knit, it will all fall apart. If you have too many rules, it will become counterproductive to the essence of what was there for you to develop, and it will become, and you will suffocate your endeavor. So it's a tightrope walk every step of the way. In that light, here were tire marks near the well. I told them to go deeper. They hit 25, 35 gallons a minute. I'm going, how am I going to deal with 100 acres with that water flow? I'm going, God, are you testing me? Going, no, you guys are going to go deeper. And it ended up costing me twice as much, just basically $50,000 when we thought it'd be about 27. And the pressure in the well was tremendous. And there are less than 20 artesian wells in the state of Arizona. And I hit one of them, the well driller, 41 years. His wife is part Navajo from the area, from the area. And he's only hit one in his whole life of 41 years of drilling at the base of Mount Lemmon, there at the north end of Tucson. And one swimming pool of water a day is coming out the top of that well. So I said, okay, even when I'm pumping the water, I'm going to make sure that the water flows, which is the same water flowing underground. I just brought it back above ground. One neighbor came onto the land, had no business doing that because I already put up the no trespassing signs, which I will make very attractive later. Right now, they're red and white plastic metal. Eventually, even no trespassing goes back to very careful procedures. The no trespassing has to be posted every corner post, has to be every 1,500 feet. You got to have all that stuff on there, and the no hunting, fishing, and and a couple rules about off-roading or being in the BLM land that's all adjacent there. But you can make the signs creative. This is where we, again, begin to know how to work together with modern conditions, land development, and making things enticing, including for those investors who have a lot of money. If you build some, what I'm going to build, which will be concrete homes, basically a swimming pool turned on its side into the mid-range of the hills there. The soil's not very good at that point. You get a lot of hard pan caliche. You're above the flood. Water's at the bottom of the lower lands and the fertile ground. You're not sitting on the top of the mountain in the foolish style that we build for views and put houses on top of a mountain, subject to every environmental condition you can have, meaning you have to overuse all kinds of demands for water and electrical or solar to keep your house cool, to keep it protected. And that's just not the right way to build. You put observation points for people to enjoy the area at the top, which also can be for security if you had to defend the land. But you want to open up, in a sense, your little monument church at the top of the highest points of your land, if it's not flat area, so people get a real feeling of where you are. My job in landscape architecture, whether it's a high-rise building or somebody, living on the outskirts of the San Fernando Valley and some nice hills, and my job is to connect people with the identity of their land. That includes living in a building, because you're still in a certain spot at a certain place on the earth. If we don't drill oil here, then we're drilling the same amount of oil on the earth, but it's just happening in Arabia, Saudi Arabia instead. So we have to not be foolish about how we do this and saying we don't want plastic, our water running through plastics. Well, high density polyethylene can lay in the sun for decades and doesn't break down. That's not good for the landfill, but hopefully it's not going in a landfill. It's going to be your piping for a long time. And underground, it puts out very few BPBs, in plasticides. Very little will end up getting into our waterways or anything. So these are the meeting points. You want to use materials that may not be the most ideal, but are the best of those materials. So the impact is less. They may be more expensive. And then you look for bulk ways to purchase them if you're doing something larger, to make it more feasible. And it's the same way that the younger hunter, military guy who has a family in Safford, Arizona, an hour and a half away, he did the fencing. He loves to be in the wilderness. He's a survivalist. That hunter picked up a rattlesnake on the land. I have not seen one snake. That was in his stuff bag for his sleeping bag, and he just moved it. Here in Topanga, I've caught the rattlers moving back in the state park. They may or may not survive. They probably have a 50% crapshoot at that point, because their habitat's 200 or 300 feet, and that's it. So if they're around and you need them, we have ground squirrels out of control here, kill lots of fruit trees that we're going to go to Arizona. They eat things that are unheard of, that goats don't even eat. Unbelievable. And what they do running into the house and how they get into closets and doors. But and you need the snakes to help keep them at bay. But same with the owls, same with the hawks, same with the eagles. So the biosphere had a controlled environment in the same context of how you do an outside biosphere without the cover. You create the cover through the plant canopies that you plan. And that internal biosphere down the road, since bees can't live under glass, they needed to pollinate the flowers. So they had to use birds that would survive in the glass, not kill each other, not peck the fruit apart necessarily, and had beaks that were the right size of the flower measurements so that they could get the nectar and move the nectar around. So man playing God is fine if man isn't going to do something that ends up backfiring and destroying things. And it goes back to when I bring up plants. Pampas grass from Australia grew out of control here in LA. And it has a saw edge on its leaf, and it begins to cut up wildlife. It takes over areas where it should be ceanothus and toyon and some of the native plants here. So again, there are plenty of plants that have no impact with the indigenous plants that you're working with in that area, and actually can enhance it. And that's the required approach at this point, because you got to be able to feed people. If I'm going to depend on wind and then it's not windy, what are how are you going to press your olives from the olive trees? Same with the electrical. Again, the electrical grids collapse because we're in a 22-year drought, other than a couple of years here. My area in Arizona had more rain recorded than any time since recording. But in general, from West Texas all the way to, Southern Cal, it's a severe drought, like you brought up earlier. World War II boats are being discovered with the water going down, and bodies are being found. And so I look at this spot and go, okay, as in all the arid areas, you have more microzones in those areas than any other place in the world. Example, standing where there's snow on the ground at the top of the Grand Canyon north face, and knowing that right there in the same demographic down at the Colorado River, it's 80 degrees. So I'm standing in the same spot where it's 80 degrees straight below me, and I have snow around me. So I look at these zones and go, let's work with this. I want cherry trees that can grow and handle the desert, and there are. I would say I would get semi-dwarf varieties because it gets very windy with the monsoon rains. You look at when they're going to be producing flowers and go, you want to get varieties that don't necessarily start flowering the fruit when it gets very windy. That a cherry tree is going to take more water than a jujube, which is the Indian date tree. Not a large tree, but very hardy to the heat. So I would then have the cherry trees knowing that they need more water, but they also are going to want the colder zones. There are plenty of warm season cherries that require very little freeze hours, or I'm sorry, chill hours. Chill hours is anything under 45 degrees. So we have X amount of nights under 45 degrees and many stone fruit varieties that will do there. But we have winds. We also have what happened on the prior land, Asian pears. The birds would peck the citrus. They want to eat the citrus. They just saw the bright orange fruit. So you generally figure a lot of the citrus in a wilderness area towards the top of the trees maybe can use for home consumption. You can cut half of it off, but not marketable because it's going to get pecked. But the Asian pears with that faded yellow, that faded very yellow-green color, the birds don't see that color. Asian pears also don't have a fragrance that attracts, like here would be a ground squirrel climbing up and eating them. Blueberries are the same way. The ground squirrels in general, they'll eat the blueberry leaf a little bit, and they're about as toxic to most animals as mulberry leaves. But they'll eat the mulberry leaves. That will poison a lot of animals. I do not know how they're doing it. But if I protect the mulberries or the mulberries and or the blueberries in the beginning and get them established, then they become too big for an animal like the ground squirrel to just come in and wipe them out. I'm bringing those two plants up because I look at, same with the cherry. The cherry goes into a zone that's cooler. Well, the cooler zone is going to be down in ravines and things. Well, the ravines are also where it's easier to keep the ground wet for the tree that's going to require more water than where the date's going to grow, the date palm and the olives up in the breezier, hotter hills with the figs and pomegranates. The neighbor, Mark Cooper, has a younger friend who I just met, Carl Loveday, and that's who I gave permission to cross the land to. They're planting pomegranates. He has a cancer healing patent from something made from those pomegranates. I know with my intuition, I'm sure what he's done is correct. Because things that seem to be very intensely red or red violet, which is the same color as the violet rays of the sun, which can create cancer or take cancer away. And that would be the same thing as very special components in that red violet colored prickly pear fruit on the opuntia that grows there in Arizona. It has some extraordinary micronutrients that very few things have. And if you delve into the color of red, now you also have marketed everywhere. You have super beets and beet powders in concentrates being used for athletes and people who work out, for people to get that nitrous oxide, more recently discovered as, I guess, a balloon for your arteries and veins to allow more oxygen flow. And so you can just take the red colors and go, okay, do I want to plant an area where I'm going to have a lot of red fruit? Now, what is that going to do? Is it going to do something additional, or is it just a creative thought that really has no meaning? So you got to analyze in a artistic composition, not just what you're planting, if you're really doing this on the most serious level, but also looking at, like you would with food combinations, you look at companion planning. But I always looked at companion planning on a tri-level aspect, not just the books that originally came out saying, hey, tomatoes and garlic can grow together, and carrots and cucumbers, they put something in the soil together. Well, yes, I brought that up about the mesquite trees and the nitrogen that they put in the soil. And they're great contributors to things growing well. Mesquite trees happen to grow where you have desert loam and it's very, very soft. Whereas a Palo Verde, gorgeous electric lime green Palo Verde shaped like a big bonsai tree, they are indicators of extremely poor soil. And so you want to grow very limited things in their areas, and you're going to probably punch a big hole with a backhoe carefully so you can backfill it with decent soil, but you can put things in those areas in the poor soil. That goes to, again, things that will take the wind and the heat and the poor soil, like a lot of pomegranate varieties and mulberries, if they've got room for their roots to grow, pine trees for creating windbreaks and cooling the desert down. There are all kinds of pine trees that thrive in the heat. So it's just it's the lower basically non-freezing areas of the same zone you're in. You're just further north in the higher elevation in the forest there, but you're still really in the in a sense, you're in the southwest arid zone, just with more rainfall and cooler temperatures, which the trees require those cool downs. But I see I see the area as cousins. Those tire tracks made the perfect shallow water pools from the water running out of that artesian well, where the frogs came through the hot desert in the summer, in the dry wash area right now where the spring's not running. And they made it down there and burrowed under our big 6-foot tub where we let the water pour into so you can plunge in it and cool off. I threw a bunch of rock by hand to make sure that the bank didn't wash away so the water could run back into the wash. The neighbor who walked down there said, "Are you going to turn that well off?" to my fencing guy, not realizing that here he lives there and doesn't understand that that's the same water that's running every day past him and underground and going into the San Pedro, which is a half a mile south of the Gila, all running into the above ground Gila, which is dry right now. I haven't seen it dry in the summer when I've seen it at this time of year in a very long time.
Wow. So this project you're working on, it's a botanical garden. It's going to be a sustainable community. It's a residence. What's the long term? And it sounds like this is quite a lengthy project. It's not like you're there for a few months and you plant some.
This is this is as permanent as you can make something permanent. It's a work of art, as truth without action has no meaning. The works of art that influence people through centuries of genius applied, is a carving by Michelangelo. And there it is. And, centuries of visitation. Yeah, you take it right to be smaller undertakings that can help finance it, like bottling the water, which can help pay for the grounds in a huge way with very little impact because the water is available. The stream is allowed to be permanent now. It's just taking the water that's running way down below ground and bringing it back to the surface. So there's the tadpoles from the frogs that came 1,500 feet through very dry brush, not like the desert frogs. They can't dry out. And the family apparently was under the tub when my friend Caesar and his girlfriend Rose turned the tub out to dump it. I was going, "Oh no, you disturbed their home," but they'll probably come back. They had kind of cleared the gravel underneath, which is put around the well, so it's not a muddy area. The stream's running on the rock that I set so it didn't wash away the bank, running back into the wash. The javelina with their baby pigs are running around, really enjoying that. And then the tire tracks were perfect for a little bit of a little transitioning of water from the stream into a little side tributary, just enough that there's these warm 1 to 2 inch, tire track areas, very shallow and perfect for the frogs to populate. I had questioned whether to bring some frogs, and a good friend of mine, Julie McAnally, said, "No, frogs, not a good idea." And I was going, see, she's reacting to introducing animals that aren't there. I would have been introducing a frog that's from that area and picking it up from somewhere where I could get one, but nature answered the thought very quickly and did it itself. I want silence in the desert for people because it's incomparable. The silence in the arid land, like the stars in the arid area, and there's no humidity blocking the visual of the night sky. But the frogs are going to be in other areas further away, so you won't necessarily hear them making sound all night. So you got to keep things in mind like that too. Wow. Nature did it on its own, so that's how it's going to go. Are we going to have silence? Yes, there'll be areas where you won't be near the water and you won't hear you'll be too far away to hear the frogs. So this is a 3D art palette composition, and the word is composition. It falls into how do you, in your term, do full spectrum regeneration. This is full spectrum regeneration. It's color, it's sound, it's emotional experience, it's practical experience, it's security and protection. It's dwellings put in the right place where you don't use up the fertile ground and you're above the flooding areas and you're not where a fire can burn you and you're deep into the earth, but you have nice visual areas of the grounds. And and you're insulated off the chart with R factor because you have thick concrete walls that are built inside part of the earth there. But there we are using concrete and steel, just regular modern products. But use
Fascinating. Is there a name of this project you're doing?
Piper. At this point, it's we just call it Piper Springs Botanical Gardens. And on my proposed legend, which you got that right. I had to ask the girls to send that to you. Yeah. And the proposed legend, it's broken down into I start with A, proposed circulation, and I call that primary arrival node, and that's visitor entry. So the very first thing when you ask what is this for, is that I'm opening up the keys to my agenda to people. That usually represents the beginning of the end. And that's the sad fact of all of our endeavors, because we can't get anywhere. This is not the monk in the cave. This is being anywhere but the cave, opening up what you're doing and opening it up right away to people camping. We're already creating camping spots for friends, and guys on the crew are coming out to help because they're kind of like not just working the jobs in LA, but here they get a little camping and exploration time besides just some work. So we're already creating the camping areas. On the first land in Dripping Springs, the very first thing I built, I put in big sealed lodge poles. I had somebody weld up some iron hubs with 8-inch lodge poles going into the middle, and we poured a concrete slab. We ran some electrical at the time. Solar wasn't as advanced as it is now. And we created an outside kitchen. We wanted people to be able to be in the shade, have a place to make food, cool down, so that you can feed people, so that you can work, so people can be out of the sun, so you can cool off, so you can work. So you had a place where you can meet people when they come to visit, where you can hang out and drink a glass of honey wine or
Right.
smoke a
So
joint
fantastic.
or whatever you're doing. But yeah, so that's the first part. Was in that sense, it was crude, but it was nicely built. It was creative. And that was what I put here as proposed circulation, which is the primary arrival node, and that's the visitor entry. And we had it as a food place so that you could continue to build. Secondary arrival node, we call shaded parking, arrival hall, staff, that would be anybody living there once it gets to that point, solar charging station, so you have a way to charge machines, equipment, and even vehicles. And then you also, right in the very beginning, trash, recycling, animal protection receptacles. So right in the very beginning, basically you want a place where you can shit without screwing things up. So this is asked backwards from almost how all people approach development. But this is from years of working like 10 people with a wet t-shirt on my head and a loincloth in the Arizona sun. A white boy working all day long in the Arizona sun, my skin in the sun. The trick was keeping something wet on your head all day long, hanging down your spine and cooling it too. And the rancher neighbor would eat his big burger at lunchtime, and he's out for 2 hours on his back, no work, nothing getting done. And I'm eating watermelon or making my hot liquidy lemon spirulina cayenne tomato drinks, filling me up with hydration and minerals and spicy stuff, and the blood flows and you keep working. So, it's such a multifaceted approach to how to do it. And of course that changes in a colder area like you're in. So the next thing is environmental center, which is permaculture and ecological strategies for future training. And that's really where you make your plans, which may just fall back to the kitchen if you start with that. Then how do you deal with anything? You got to have a good ATV or good 4-wheel drive, roads. You have pervious pavement areas, earthen, shuttle routes eventually, bridges, because you're not going to mess with the washes, as everybody does, gates and fencing, and retaining and erosion controls and walls. We go back to the hunter, who's respectful of the animals and moved the rattlesnake and didn't kill it like all the 6 neighbors that I have miles back. She even shot the bobcat, the lady I brought a fruit tree for, who's almost lived there her whole life because the bobcat was getting too close to her doves. And she didn't want to, but she did. She did air guns at the javelina, not to hurt them, and they still would come back because they become friendly. They're pig family and they're smart. So you don't fight them. You have to find ways of herding the animals, because if you do things right, you're going to have every animal coming. Rattlesnakes, if they're in an area where there are a lot of people, yeah, you got to catch them and move them down the road. They may starve to death, they may survive, but it gives them a better chance rather than just killing them. The bobcat and or a bigger mountain lion, I don't think bear would come into this area. They could, but you're working with them. So when I say working with them, what did I do with the washes on the last round? You don't bulldoze through washes. You build bridge over the natural land flow. That would be basic with any landscape architect in a rain runoff area, that you would enforce those runoff areas and reinforce them. And there's many forms of reinforcement. This also goes for you in Colorado. So mulberry trees, I said how the ground squirrels can eat them, but they're toxic to most animals. Nothing out there will eat them. I have, so I use the mulberry and plant it along the wash because they have very tenacious roots. Just like a date palm can be planted into a wash if it's not a major flood zone. Sand can bury up against its trunk 6 feet, 8 feet, and won't rot. Never gets washed away once it's established. So it's the same thing. Our wash gets some stuff running down it pretty hard. Not a lot of rock, which is a good thing. I mean, it's a milder form of flooding, but the trees are all through that, and the wash floods through them. The cottonwoods, no problem. Many other trees will do the same thing. You can line the banks of the wash. The soil's full of minerals, loamy, and you just use large rock to create diversion paths in a permacultural way and in a permeable way, where it will help divert water flow from just smashing all over the trees, but the tree roots are helping hold the wash in place when the water flows happen. So you slow down the erosion of the wash, you start to retain the richest soil on that property, which is like when they will put a rock jetty for a restaurant here at the coast. And over time, the sandbars change their layout. And now you have a great place for surfers, and the people in the restaurant can watch the surfers now in a new surfing area. There's no bad impact from that. You've just given a place for people to identify with to be able to connect with the identity of their land. Now you got another place for surfers and novices to come out and get in the ocean and surf, because the rock was done in a way unplanned that it would create a sandbar that would create new waves in a certain area. Well, how about taking it one step further and having enough foresight and intuition that you can have the foresight to know this is probably going to be some of the results that come out of here. And there will be other things I don't know, but they're going to be conducive to enhancing that area of the land. We call God the creator because we have a responsibility to be creative. And we can only improve reality, which is our task as human beings, by knowing where we are. And what lessons did we learn from history to this moment right now? What meaning is any kind of a community going to have to the outside world? And if it doesn't have meaning, it's self-centered, 100%. And how can you make it so unusual and beautiful that it attracts people who would never normally be coming to places like that? You're not just putting it together for a bunch of people to stand around a teepee, talk about how grand their life is and how, and how nice the loincloth is you're wearing. You're talking about people in wheelchairs and, and modern man, coming there and eating his burger at lunchtime, but really getting an eyeful.
Absolutely. And I will say this, I know we're just over an hour.
Okay.
And I'd like to do this. Before we started the recording, you read a really beautiful piece to me about something you had kind of like
Yes,
found out, you
absolutely.
resurfaced earlier in the day. Would you be
I
willing
would
to share that again?
Yes, I would love to sign off with that. And then
Great.
and then I'm And then, and this will happen again. Yes, so this is from a short version of the Atlantean Mystery School training that I was privy to at 19 years old. I got drawn right there. It was the very early days of a lot of, again, I hate the cliche term new age, because new age to me mostly was old age with new paint.
Right.
But it was the beginning of a lot of metaphysical occurrences. But this was focused around the Lord Jesus the Christ, not just Christ consciousness, but it had things that a lot of conventional Christians would have said, boy, that's coming from darkness. I understood it to be valuable. This was in the Green Flame. That's as far as the teaching got, with some spectacular people there in a and in that the session 1 was called Oasis. So I'm going to very clearly and rapidly read the story here, because we can end up building something and then losing all of it, and it having no impact or meaning to anybody for any reason ever. And then why were we put on the earth? Oasis. Once at the beginning of recorded history, a group of families were caught in a storm. The caravan that they had been a part of could not search for them any longer than their supplies would allow, and it eventually had to proceed without them. Over the next few weeks, starvation and weather took its toll, and when the separated group finally found shelter in a small valley, it no longer had its original structure. The survivors set about building houses and clearing brush. Fields were planted and cisterns were carved out of rock. The men and women remarried, and the genetic mix was such that many strong and healthy children were born and grew to be caring and contributing adults. It turned out that the valley opened out into the banks of a river, but exploration was impossible. The river overflowed and raged in summer, and its reaches were blocked by rapids, waterfalls, and ice in winter. In effect, this new tribe of human beings was isolated. The people had found a perfect habitat in the midst of impenetrable geography. Generations passed and the people prospered. More families cleared more land and planted more crops. They fished the river and trapped land animals. They told stories of a misty past and invented plans of a dreamy future. All seemed well. Disputes were settled in the normal ways at first. The less compatible moved to opposite sides, and the friendly moved closer together. Population pressure is what forced the ethical deformities. There was no way to safely immigrate. The sick suffered first, and then the old. Eventually, lotteries of a sort were held, the losers of which had to suffer the death of their children. When the members of the largest families lost at these drawings, they resorted to violence, won their war, and sealed the valley's fate. The genetic mix was lost. Immunities were reduced. Over the next few generations, a series of waterborne diseases wiped the people out. The dwellings rotted. The fields grew over with brush, and except for the cisterns that were eventually no sign that human beings had ever been there. Those original families could have died in the storm. If they had, there would have been fewer dreams, feelings, thoughts, conflicts, and laughter in that small valley. Maybe that is the only difference. Once 1,000 years ago, two pockets of human beings became aware of one another. Neither had enough resources or power or people to conquer the other, but they both wanted some of what the other could produce. The obvious answer was trade. A council of elders from one group decided to outfit a caravan to transport its excess produce to the other. The caravan was then return with goods from the other group. Since part of each load was food and other parts were clothes and utensils, the individuals who ran the caravan supply took a portion as compensation. In the beginning, the individuals who ran the caravan were assigned to roles by the elders. Their criteria used range from those thought best suited to those with no other known or valuable talents. But as with all things, the caravan proved to be its own metaphysical environment, and over time sort of selected its own members and masters. These caravan people developed their own jargon and other ways of effectively and efficiently accomplishing their tasks. And it will go on, which I could read in another time, into
Brilliant. Brilliant.
what those outposts became and how valuable they became to the greater parts of society in the bigger cities and towns and things that were developed. And it's a very important way to give a realistic and metaphysical analysis to what always happens in these developments and how to avoid them as much as possible, create safeguards both legally and politically, so that if you have problems, that you aren't your whole undertaking isn't destroyed. And that is so important. So we can have our grand ideas. We can all be hanging out and going, wow, this is a nice, a big survival event, and people are sharing all their knowledge. But if everybody stayed there together, you're going to end up with people who don't get along with people, and they end up on the periphery of this event, and then the conflicts develop. Well, that seems to generally be the pattern. And so how do you, without being the single big boss and going back to a fiefdom or a kingdom, collectively able to put together something that feeds people, something that's gives normal. I'll call you back in a second. Sorry, lost you there for a moment.
Okay, yeah, my phone battery is getting low anyways too,
That's
but
it.
yeah, absolutely.
So
Cross-pollination, germination, collaboration, cooperation.
that's right. So that's why I'm planting anything but indigenous, and I did it for 17 years of my life with great success, and it's there. And it only enhanced that environment, and it made a way for people to be cooled down and shaded. And, the plants are putting out the carbon that we need, and they're breathing in, and they're, expelling moisture, and you have walkways. So there's a blueprint that this will all end up, I guess, in a book to be shared, that people can use this format, like Seeds of Change use the visitor guidelines. It
Right.
goes across from the politics are as critical as the food you produce. And
Yeah, it's symbiotic.
That's right.
Symbiotic. Everything has to be working.
And that's what I'll sign off with, Michael.
Well, John, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating. I'm sure we'll have more discourse in the future, and a lot of respect for taking on such a mammoth project with such profound impact and implications, and the fact that you're doing it. And appreciate all your effort and sweat and knowledge, and good luck. And maybe I'll get to visit you sometime down there in Arizona.
Yes, no, I would like that, and I intend to have people coming when it's in its first ready stages like that. And then if the podcast is, posted somewhere, I'll send it to friends and share this.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. It's part of what, we're doing here on the land. We're doing the land-based permaculture, but we're also cultivating the social permacultural piece and the connectivity and the communication.
And in our next communication, I've got to go stay singly focused on the permaculture aspect, because I have a huge amount of things to share there in the application that I've already done for a big part of my life, and can provide some very good guidelines to your particular area and how to apply yourself. Again, dealing with creating microenvironments, which are so important in a land base.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Stay cool, stay hydrated, and we'll talk soon. And I really do appreciate your time, John.
Thank you, Michael, and to anybody listening. All right.
Absolutely. And thanks for listening for another episode here of Solutionaries. We had a little bit of time here with JohnMichaelCohen out in Arizona, and doing incredible work. So we'll be back soon, and everyone stay safe, take care of each other, stay compassionate, and keep activating and actualizing solutions. Roll up your sleeves. It's time that we do this all together.
There you go. God bless you, brother.
God bless.
All right.